What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to flush the coolant system in the 390 Duke. This application can be done on pretty much any motorcycle, and the reason I'm doing this is because this coolant is supposed to give you much better cooling capabilities in high heat temp areas. So down here in SoCal, it's the end of April, beginning of May, and we're already seeing 90 some degrees, and up here where I live, it's going to get upwards of towards 100 usually during peak summer. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to engine ice, and hopefully what we'll see is just a little bit cooler engine operating temperature. Also, this stuff is safe to use on racetracks, so a lot of racers switch over to this stuff and get rid of the green stuff because you can't have that stuff on the track. So if you're looking for a good coolant to use on the track as well, this is a good option. That way you don't have to switch before you go to the track. Your bike's just always ready. I already opted to remove the side fairing over here, as you can see. Removing the belly pan here, that is not optional. You have to do that because you need to get to this 8mm bolt right here. That is the drain bolt, and that is the lowest most part of the coolant system. This whole thing right here, that's your water pump. So we're going to take this 8mm bolt out, and that's going to allow the coolant to drain from the very most bottom part of the system. Up here, that's your overflow reservoir tank. I went ahead and I marked the full mark. I got the bike up on a paddock stand, by the way. So I marked the full mark right there, so that way when I put coolant back in the bike, I know exactly where I need to fill that tank to, because the one in the front here is kind of hard to read. Also, I went ahead and removed the cap off that reservoir because that's going to allow for air to come in from that top portion and allow things to drain a little bit quicker. Word to the wise, do not remove the radiator cap until the coolant from here has completely flushed out, because if you remove this cap right now, the coolant from here is going to take the easiest way out, which is not the smaller hole down here, it's the bigger hole right here. So it'll push coolant up and out. So I would not remove that radiator cap unless you want to spill coolant everywhere if there's coolant still inside this reservoir. This bolt right here doesn't have a whole lot of torque on it. It's not going to take much to get it off. It'll just crack right loose, and then we should be able to get it by hand. And there is a copper washer on the end of this thing here. You don't want to lose that. Make sure you got your drain pan ready to go. Coolant's probably going to splash places, so that's why I kind of put the towel down. All right, so we got nothing really coming out yet. There's still a vacuum being created here, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen that radiator cap. Yep, I just cracked it. Just a little crack. And now coolant's coming out. And the way it splashes and hits the pan from that height, it will kind of splatter a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and crack this a little bit more so we can get even more air introduced to the system. And the reason I took the side fairing off is because this cap is really hard to get to when it's still on there. So removing it helps you really get your hand in there. So yeah, you can see as I start to get air into the system, it starts to really purge. There it goes. So I'm controlling this with the cap right now. If I push down on this cap, I create a vacuum, so I can control the flow, so to speak. All right, so all the coolant just left the reservoir up there. I'm gonna go ahead and leave the cap alone. I'm just gonna pull my bucket up a little bit so it's not splashing so heavily. There's only 1.1 liters of coolant in the system, so it's not much. If you imagine a 2 liter of Coke, it's going to be half that. We're going to let all of this drain out, and then over here I've got some distilled water that I'm going to use to flush the system. So once this is completely done draining, I'll come back and I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to use the distilled water to flush this out. So this is sort of another reason that I'm doing this. I don't like these green coolants too much, especially in a hot running motor like these. You can already see like some gunk on the cap here. If I just rub that off on the towel, it starts to clean up really good. So I'm gonna get this cleaned off and rinsed off as well. All right, so now we're ready to start flushing the system out. I've got a funnel up here leading into the reservoir because I do want to flush that reservoir out just a little bit. So it's a little bit awkward, but I'm gonna do my best to pour this water in here. It's gonna start coming out the bottom. And this is just water, it's not a big deal. So you can kind of see the water line. It's falling down and it's draining into our radiator here. After this is done draining down, I think one flush is probably good. You could do it twice or as many times as you want. I've got plenty of distilled water, so after that I'm going to move my funnel down to here and we're going to flush from the radiator directly, and we're gonna do it pretty fast. So this stuff right here is already starting to come out pretty clear. Now the problem is you can't just flush water through the radiator and all that and expect for all this coolant to be gone. You're going to have to actually fill the system like how you would with coolant, but you're only going to use distilled water. And then what you're going to do is you're going to run the bike until it reaches operating temperature, and you'll know that it's at operating temperature when the fan kicks on. When the fan kicks on, that typically means that the thermostat's going to open, and when the thermostat opens, then the system will be free flowing completely. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull the coolant that's still in the block back into the system, and it's going to dilute it with the distilled water. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to let the bike cool down, and then we're going to drain it again, and then we're going to see what color it comes out. And it's probably going to take 2, maybe 3 complete fills, operating temperature, and drains in order for us to get the coolant or the distilled water basically to come out clear. Once it comes out clear, we know that we're ready to go ahead and fill the bike with the engine ice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flush the radiator until this looks fairly clear, and then I'm going to fill the system up. So I'll show you guys how to do that here in a second. So if you look here, I just poured a bunch of water into the radiator directly, and this stuff is still coming out with a fairly green tone to it. So I'm going to continue flushing the radiator until this starts to come out pretty much clear. And then I can fill the system, like I said, with distilled water only, and bring the bike up to operating temperature to get anything that might be left in the block out. It might be a little bit hard to tell, but it is starting to come out a little bit clearer. Here and there, the grain starts to come back into it, but we're getting there. All right, so I went ahead and I put the drain bolt back in place. The copper washer is still on there. I should be able to reuse this copper washer completely. The bike has fairly low miles, but do keep in mind if your bike has high miles or you've already done this once before, you're probably going to want to replace that copper washer because it's only going to hold for so long. Now that we have flushed this until the water has started to come out clear down here, we're going to come around to the other side, and I'm getting ready to basically fill the bike with nothing but distilled water. And in order to do that, I need to crack this bleeder bolt here so that I can fill the system without getting too much air introduced. So let me grab the right size wrench and we'll do that. All right, so this is a 10mm, and the manual says that we need to unscrew this a total of 3 rotations. So I'm just gonna keep an eye on one of these Phillips head notches in here until it comes around 3 rotations. I'm gonna crack this, and I can get it by hand now. So that's 1, 2, 3. So at this point, we need to start filling from the radiator on the other side, and we're gonna look for water to start coming out of here with no bubbles. The manual says to lean the bike to the right a little bit when you're doing this, especially when you're filling the bike with the coolant for your final fill, but it doesn't say if that means from slightly right from the kickstand or slightly right from an upright position. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start doing it from the upright position and just see how it goes. All right, so I filled it. Water started coming out of the bleeder with pretty much no bubbles or anything. It's still dripping ever so slightly. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that bleeder back down. Does not need a whole lot of torque. It's a very small bolt. Just get to like tight and a little bit, right? That's all you need. All right, so now that that's tight, come around to the other side, and we've got water all the way up to the top of our radiator here. Something I like to do is just squeeze the hoses a little bit to kind of manually burp any air. We are still filled all the way up at our radiator. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put the radiator cap back on, which, by the way, I did clean thoroughly. Also go ahead and put the cap back onto the expansion tank. We are not going to put any water into the expansion tank because we want to be able to leave room in there that as the bike burps out any air bubbles or any excess water that it needs to, it will just go into the expansion tank, and then when we drain again, it'll all just come back out. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna fire up the bike. I'm gonna let it run. This usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes for it to reach a temperature where the radiator fan will kick on. I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then once that fan kicks on, I'll let the bike cool down, and then I'll drain it again from the bottom, and if it looks clear, then I will go ahead and call it good, and we'll fill it up with the engine ice. If it's not clear, then we're going to fill up the radiator one more time with the distilled water and basically wait for it to be completely clear.
Hopefully you guys can hear me okay, but something I wanted to say real quick is while you're doing this, make sure you keep an eye on your temperature gauge and make sure that the bike doesn't start to overheat, because if it starts to overheat, you just shut it off immediately, because that means there's too much air in the system.
Alright, so there it was, our coolant fan kicked on. It took about maybe 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less. So at this point, you want to leave this alone for probably at least an hour. Come back and kind of touch the hoses and see if they still feel too hot or anything. You don't want to open this thing right away or crack that bleeder bolt unless you want to get burned. At this point, the system is fully pressurized, and it'll spray you and it's going to hurt and you'll end up in the hospital. So just make sure you leave yourself plenty of time in the day that you don't need the motorcycle for anything. If you need to go run some errands, go run some errands, you know, do whatever. All right, so it's been about an hour. I've touched the coolant hoses here and they're pretty cold to the touch. Just to be precautious, I would take a rag and put it around your coolant cap while you're gonna take it off this time, just in case there's any back pressure. But this is good, absolutely no back pressure. At this point, it's safe to go ahead and crack our drain bolt back open. Let me grab my wrench and get this cracked open. All right, so this time we're just trying to see how clear the fluid's gonna come out. We wanna get this as clear as possible. Yeah, she's still got some green tint to her. I'm probably gonna fill this back up and flush it one more time. I like to get mine as clear as possible. It would take a lot to get it to come out ultra clear, but a little tiny hint of green isn't gonna kill us, but this is too much for my liking. You guys know what to do at this point. Fill it back up, crack the bleeder bolt on the other side while you're doing that. Fill it up until fluid starts to pour out of the bleeder bolt, and then let the bike warm up, do its thing. Don't fill the reservoir with distilled water, you don't need to. And then wait an hour, come back, drain it again. At that point, we should be looking pretty clear. So I'll see you guys when we're ready for the next drain. All right, so this is the second flush that I'm about to drain out here. So we're gonna get a look at this fluid and see how clear we have it now. Hopefully it's a lot clearer than the first flush. The first flush still had a fair amount of green in it. That's actually looking really good. I'm happy with that. There's actually almost no green in it. There might be some residual color in there from the first drain. Coming out of here does not have much green in it at all. And actually the fluid is not slippery and slick like coolant either. This is all the old coolant, and it's also all of the fluid from all of the flushing we did. My distilled water, my 1 gallon only has just a little bit left in it. So 1 gallon should be plenty enough to get this job done. I'm gonna let it drip until it comes to pretty much no drip left. And then we will be ready to put our drain bolt back in and fill this up with our engine ice. All right, so we're ready to start filling with our engine ice. I've got it ready right here, got my funnel ready. I've got the bleeder screw cracked 3 turns. I've got the drain bolt down there all nice and tight. So I'm just gonna keep an eye on the bleeder bolt over here and look for the overflow to start coming out. I'm gonna pour this fairly slowly so that way we don't produce too much bubbles. There it goes. You can see some bubbles right there that came out initially. Over here, it's pretty full in the radiator right now. And if I keep pouring, it's just gonna continue to come out of not only this side, but the bleeder side as well. So let me grab my rag and just dry this off, and we'll tighten this bleeder screw down. Not too tight, just tight enough. Wipe that off so we don't confuse any residual fluid with being a leak or anything like that. We've got fluid all the way up in the radiator there. I've used almost half of this. At this point, I'm gonna put the radiator cap back on. So at this point, I'm going to not put anything in the expansion tank just yet. We're gonna start the bike up, let it hit operating temperature one more time. We're gonna let it cool down, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna pop the radiator cap off while the bike is on the side stand, and we're gonna top off the radiator if it needs any extra fluid. Once we top it off in here, we'll close it back up, then we'll fill this up to our full line, and then at that point we'll be good to go. All right, so I just finished the heat cycling with the engine ice in there. Temperature came up to normal, fan kicked on. Took about 10 minutes or so for the fan to kick on. So I'm gonna let the bike cool down at this point, and then I'm gonna take it off of the rear stand, put it on the side stand, and once it's cold, I'll pop the radiator cap and fill up any little bit of fluid that I might need to, and then I'll fill the expansion tank. And at that point, you're good to go. Take the bike out on a ride, make sure it doesn't overheat while you're riding or anything like that, but that's basically it. All right, so it's been pretty much an hour or so since I filled the bike up with engine ice. Pipes are nice and cool to the touch, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove the radiator cap very easily. All right, it's always nerve-wracking, I don't know why. So we took a look in here, and you can see the level is not where it needs to be. What we wanna do is put our funnel back in here, grab our engine ice, and we're just gonna top the radiator off. And pour slowly, that way you don't create any air pockets. And then just keep an eye down here for the level coming up. As you can see, it's already coming up. It's actually trying to overflow a little bit. There we go. All right, see, so it just took a tiny little pour to get that back up there. Put the radiator cap back on. Make sure you tighten it all the way down. The coolant can be slick, so grab a towel if you need to. Now we're gonna fill up the expansion tank to the appropriate level, and we will be done. All right, so as you can see, I got the engine ice in the reservoir filled up to the full mark that I made earlier. At this point, you could go and take your bike out on a ride just to make sure everything is good to go. Idle the bike one more time, check for leaks down at your plug, and also make sure that the bleeder valve on the other side is good. Just run the bike, let it come up to temperature, take it out for a ride, make sure there's no overheating issues, and you're good to go. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Don't forget, still got the 1,000 subscriber giveaway going. I'm going to give away that center prism tube Wi-Fi camera setup to one lucky winner that lives in the United States. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.